All right, let's get ready to dive deep into something pretty special today. We're talking smoked deer shoulder with BBQ glaze.
Oh, yeah.
We've been getting a lot of requests about wild game lately, and Fork and Fry just put out this amazing recipe script, so we're going to break it all down for you.
It's a great one. A real classic with a twist.
Exactly. We'll look at the history, the techniques, and of course, all those mouth-watering flavors.
It's more than just a recipe, it's a story.
I like that. So, Fork and Fry mentioned that Native Americans were smoking venison way back when,
Yeah.
long before we had, fancy smokers and all that.
Right. It was all about preservation back then, making sure that meat lasted.
Talk about resourceful.
Absolutely. They were masters of their craft.
And it's kind of cool to think that those early techniques kind of laid the groundwork for what we now call BBQ.
It's a direct link to our culinary heritage.
Speaking of heritage, let's get into this recipe. Fork and Fry keeps the rub pretty simple, right?
Yeah, they do. Olive oil, kosher salt, black pepper, garlic powder, smoked paprika.
And a touch of cayenne if you like a little heat.
Exactly. It's all about building those base flavors.
Now, I was curious about the smoked paprika. Because you're already smoking the meat, right? So why add smoked paprika to the rub?
Oh, that's a good question. You see, the wood chips provide that initial smokiness, but the paprika, it adds another dimension.
Just like layering flavors.
Exactly. Think of it like building a fire. You use different types of wood for a more complex aroma.
I love that analogy. Makes total sense. Now let's talk about the glaze. This is where things get really interesting. Ketchup, apple cider vinegar, brown sugar, Worcestershire sauce, Dijon mustard.
And more smoked paprika, of course. Plus some garlic powder.
It's like a symphony of flavor.
Sweet, tangy, smoky, it's all in there.
That apple cider vinegar is a nice touch.
Oh, yeah. It adds brightness.
Yeah.
And helps tenderize the meat, too.
So it's doing double duty. I'm noticing a theme here. Every ingredient has a purpose.
Absolutely. That's the mark of a well-designed recipe.
All right, let's walk through the steps. First, you trim any excess fat from the deer shoulder, pat it dry, then rub it with that olive oil and spice blend
They recommend letting it sit at room temperature for a bit.
before it hits the smoker.
Yeah, that gives the salt time to work its magic.
So it's not just about seasoning. It's about letting those seasonings penetrate.
Exactly. It's all about the science.
Okay, so the smoker's preheated to 225 degrees Fahrenheit. We've got our hickory or applewood chips ready, and that seasoned deer shoulder is ready for its smoky transformation.
Time for the low and slow magic.
Fork and Fry says to smoke it for 5 to 6 hours. And they really emphasize using a water pan in the smoker.
Oh, that's key.
I've heard about water pans, but why are they so important?
Well, think of it this way. The water pan acts like a humidifier.
So it keeps the environment moist.
Exactly. Prevents the meat from drying out.
It's like a little sauna for the deer shoulder.
Exactly. Creating the perfect conditions for that slow transformation.
Now, speaking of keeping things moist, Fork and Fry has a pro tip.
What's that?
Spritzing the meat with apple cider vinegar every hour during smoking.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
What's the thinking behind that?
Well, first of all, it adds another layer of flavor.
Okay, I can see that.
As the vinegar evaporates, it leaves the subtle tanginess. And it also helps create that beautiful bark.
That caramelized crust.
You got it.
All right, so the shoulder's prepped, the smoker's going.
Okay.
But what about that glaze?
Right? Can't forget about that.
While the meat is smoking,
Yeah.
you whip up that BBQ glaze, just combine all the ingredients in a saucepan, simmer it until it thickens up,
Easy peasy.
and then, in the last 30 minutes of smoking, you brush that glaze all over the deer shoulder.
Oh, that's the best part.
That sticky, sweet, tangy coating.
It's a flavor explosion.
Before we move on, I want to remind everyone, you can find the full recipe with all the details over www.forkandfry.com. Be sure to check it out and let us know what you think. And if you try it yourself, share your creations on social media using #ForkandFry.
We love seeing what you all cook up.
All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll be back to dive even deeper into this recipe.
Sounds good. So we're talking low and slow smoking here. It's a technique that takes a little patience.
But the results are worth it.
Oh, absolutely. It's all about breaking down those tough connective tissues.
That's what gives you that melt-in-your-mouth tenderness.
Exactly. And that low temperature, 225 degrees Fahrenheit, it ensures that the meat cooks evenly without drying out.
It's finding that sweet spot.
Yeah, where the heat gently coaxes out the flavors.
Now, Fork and Fry really stresses using a meat thermometer to hit that internal temperature of 190 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
Do you think that's essential? I mean, some folks rely on touch or visual cues.
Well, experience definitely helps. But with smoking meat, a thermometer is your best friend.
Especially with a cut like deer shoulder.
Yeah, it can be pretty thick.
So you want to make sure it's cooked through.
Exactly. 190 degrees, that's the magic number.
Now, Fork and Fry suggests hickory or applewood chips for this recipe. What are your thoughts on those?
They're both great choices. Hickory gives you that robust, smoky flavor, almost bacon-like.
I love that.
And applewood is a bit sweeter, more delicate.
I could see that working well with venison.
Oh, yeah. But, you can experiment with other woods, too.
Really? What else would you recommend?
Well, for venison, cherry wood is a good option. It imparts a nice sweetness and gives the meat a beautiful reddish hue.
Interesting.
Or pecan wood. It's got a nutty, slightly savory flavor.
So many options.
It really comes down to personal preference.
Now, let's say you're working with a larger deer shoulder.
Okay.
Would you adjust the cooking time?
Absolutely. You'd need to increase the smoking time.
How much longer?
A good rule of thumb is an extra hour for every pound of meat.
Okay, so just keep an eye on that internal temperature.
Exactly. It's your most reliable indicator of doneness.
Speaking of the deer shoulder, Fork and Fry specifically chose a whole shoulder for this recipe. Any reason why that cut is so good for smoking?
It's all about the marbling.
The fat content.
Yeah, it keeps the meat moist during that long cooking process. And the shoulder has a good amount of marbling.
I see.
Plus, its irregular shape. It allows for maximum smoke penetration.
So it's like it was made for smoking.
It really is.
Fork and Fry also touched on the sustainability aspect of using venison. It's lean, organic, a great alternative to factory-farmed meats.
Absolutely. More and more people are embracing ethical eating.
And wild game is becoming more popular.
It's about making conscious choices about the food we consume.
I like that Fork and Fry brings that to the forefront.
Food is a reflection of our values, our traditions, our connection to nature.
Well said. Before we wrap up, I want to remind everyone to visit www.forkandfry.com for the full recipe and all their great content. And be sure to share your culinary adventures with us on social media using #ForkandFry.
We love seeing what you all create in the kitchen.
We're back for the final part of our deep dive. And I'm feeling pretty inspired. All this talk about smoked deer shoulder, it makes me want to fire up the smoker right now.
It's a dish that calls to you.
And Fork and Fry really makes it seem approachable, even for someone who's never smoked meat before.
They do a great job of breaking it all down.
Step by step. So let's recap what we've learned. We started with the history, those Native American preservation techniques.
Right.
Then we got into the nitty-gritty of the recipe.
All those delicious ingredients.
The importance of low and slow smoking, the different types of wood you can use.
Then that water pan to keep everything nice and moist.
And we even talked about sustainability, the ethical aspect of using wild game.
It's all connected.
It's been a journey.
Yeah, a delicious one. Thinking about this recipe, it makes me wonder, how can we take this approach, this blend of tradition and innovation, and apply it to other parts of our lives?
That's a great question.
How can we honor the past while still being creative, finding new ways to do things?
I like that. It's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
So if you're feeling inspired to try this recipe, head over to www.forkandfry.com. They've got all the details there.
And don't forget to share your creations with us.
On social media, use the #ForkandFry.
We love to see what you all come up with.
Until next time, happy cooking, everyone.
Happy cooking!